Hello, this week we are going to do a basic install of our data center, virtual data center. Okay, so what we're going to do is use our workstation player, and we're going to install these three servers. So one of them is going to be our Active Directory server. It's also going to be our storage server, and so it's going to serve out iSCSI disk to the two Hyper-V servers. Now these two Hyper-V servers are eventually going to be clustered, and clustering requires very close communication. So they've got this thing called a heartbeat. So they've got a heartbeat network. And in this case, we're going to make it a 172.1.0/24 subnet, .10 here, .20 there. And the other thing that's important, the iSCSI disk storage to give out to the two Hyper-V servers that get clustered together is, so they're all connected via another switch, which, a separate network, which we're going to call the storage network. And so the storage server itself is going to be 10.10.10.1/24, and the Hyper-V1 is going to be 10.10.10.10/24, and Hyper-V2 is going to be 10.10.10.20/24. So we've got sort of similar in subnet numbering between the networks, so that things are fairly consistent. We're also going to have a management network where our host operating system uses some management software, Windows Admin Center. We're going to manage via the host-only network card, which has got a standard subnet of 192.168.64.x/24, and it gives out IP addresses in that 64 subnet. So these three network cards will get an IP address that's different, and 64.1 is the host network card, host-only network card. So apart from that, so this is a DHCP given IP address. The bridged network, there's a DHCP server on the outside of our host machine, which gives out IP addresses to the host machine, but also it's going to, because the Active Directory server and the two Hyper-V servers are also bridged to that network card, they will also get an IP address from the external DHCP network, which in this case, in my case, where I am at the moment, is a 192.168.1 .x/24 subnet. So they'll get a random IP address in there, and we'll use that 1.x IP address, basically just to get out to the internet, download things if we need to, that sort of stuff. So this Active Directory iSCSI server, storage server, needs 3 network cards. Both Hyper-V machines need 4 network cards, principally because they've got this extra heartbeat network that's between them. Okay, so we're going to install all of that. I'm just going to resize this, pop up our VM workstation player, and we're going to start making machines. So on player file, let's open a new one. We're going to use, I've gone to the OneDrive VM resources AVA files, they're the appliances. So I'm going to use the 2019 sysprept. I'm going to import it. And I'm going to call this is going to be the Active Directory server. So I'm just going to call it, say, PDC for primary domain controller. Where it goes, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to browse and put it in a specific place. So I'm going to put it on my drive C in the VMware virtual machines. So I'm going to make a new folder in there. I'm going to call it PDC. Okay, so it comes up as PDC. That's the one we're doing. We're going to go new. So that's where it's going to put it. We're going to import this virtual machine. So what we're going to do now is just pause until it finishes importing. Before we run it, we need to set a few things to make sure that when it runs the first time that it's actually okay. So we'll get to that shortly. I'm just going to pause this while it's doing an import. Okay. Okay, so that machine's now been imported. Before we can start this machine, we need to configure it so that it'll actually work inside VM Workstation. This virtual machine was constructed, or this virtual appliance was created using VirtualBox, so it's a little bit different. So let's edit the virtual machine settings. Currently this has got 4 gigabytes of memory, and I'm happy to drop that down to 1536 or 1.5 gigabytes. The important thing in the options is to make sure that this is not other, that it is actually a Microsoft 2019 server. And the other thing that we need to do is in the hardware, under the processors tab, we've currently got 2 cores. You can put as many cores as you want. I'm going to give it 4 cores just for fun. Is that we need to tick this box, Intel VTX or AMD-V. These are the virtualization circuitry in the processor itself. Now on my machine I can also virtualize the IO MMU, Input Output Memory Management Unit. There are a lot of machines where that won't work, so it depends on what type of processor you've got. The main thing is to be able to tick this box here. Once you've ticked that box, everything's quite fine. The thing that doesn't work for me is you can't tick the virtualize the CPU performance counters. So if I tick that, the thing doesn't work. Don't have it ticked, it works fine. So basically, yeah. Now the other thing we need on this machine is 3 network cards. I've only got 1 at the moment, so and it's currently set to NAT. I want the first card to be bridged, so we're going to have that bridged to a physical network card. And I'm going to go add. I'm going to add another network card, and on that network card I want it to go to an internal storage, and then the third network card I'm going to have, actually I might have the second card as bridge. So for every machine we'll have the first card is bridged to go out to the internet, the second card bridged to the host only adapter, and then the third and fourth cards for the other network. So let's go make this thing to the host only card, and then I'm going to add a third card, network card, and this one is going to be set, in this case it's going to be connected to the internal storage. So I want this to go to a LAN segment called storage. Okay, now I typed that in originally, that's why it's there. Or what you can do is you can go LAN segments and you can add your own, different virtual switches essentially. Okay, so I've got one called storage. I'm actually going to create another one called heartbeat, so let's just do that right now. Add one called heartbeat. Heartbeat, like that. Now I'm not connecting to that one, I could, but I'm just going to the storage network. So that's these 3 network cards here. Okay, so let's go OK. Or can I connect to something else? Yep, I just wanted to make sure that that came up. Okay, so the display, we could also accelerate 3D graphics. I don't see any real need for that for this. Okay, so I'm going to go. Now, the interesting thing is we've got 150 gigabytes hard drive here. What I really want to do is I really want to create another disk in here that's going to be used for the iSCSI storage, that's going to be given out. So what I'm going to do is going to add in another couple of hard drives. So if I look at a hard disk, my mouse is playing up a little bit here at the moment. We can set whether it's IDE, SCSI, SATA, NVMe, whatever. I'm going to use NVMe because it's faster. So let's just do that. And I'm going to create a new virtual disk. And I'm going to allocate, we could just leave it at 60 gigabytes. 60 gigabytes is quite fine. What we want to do is we want it to have it as stored as a single file, but we don't want to allocate all the space now because then it just makes a 60 gigabyte file. We want it to be dynamically allocated, so it only uses it if it uses it. Okay, so I'll go next. And it's going to create one called PDC VMDK. I actually want this to be PDC_1. So I want this to be disk 1. I'm going to make it disk 2, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to RAID them together later on. Okay, so let's go finish. So here's a new, so we've got a hard disk SATA, 150 gig, I've got an NVMe, and I'm going to create another NVMe. So new hard disk next. It's an NVMe recommended. I'm going to use, create a new disk. It's going to be 60 gigabytes, and I'm going to store it as a single file. And I want it to be PDC_2. Okay, so I got 1 and 2. Okay, so that gives me 3 hard drives. I've got a 150 gig drive, which is the SATA drive, which is where the operating system is, and then I've got 2 NVMe 60 gig drives, which I'm going to mirror or RAID together. Okay, so we've got OK on that machine. So we've now got our Active Directory, or PDC, Active Primary Domain Controller, Active Directory, with 2 spare disks ready for iSCSI. Okay, so that's the first one. Let's create the next one. So we go File, Open. Let's import another 2019 server. We want this one to be called HV1. And we want to browse and stick that in the same directory structure as we put the other one in. So VMware VMs, and what I want to do is create a new folder and call it HV1. So that's the HV1 folder, there it is, and I'm going to go import. So while this is importing, I'll just pause this for a little while until it's finished importing, and then we'll make the changes to this particular virtual machine as well. Okay, so our HV1 is now imported. So what we're going to do is edit the settings on this machine. And again, we're going to pop this back to 1536, so it's 1.5 gigabytes of memory. Processors, I'm going to pop it up to 4. And I'm going to tick the box here for Intel VTX and AMD V. But on the options, I also need to make sure that this is a Microsoft Windows and that it's actually Server 2019. Okay, so back to the hardware. I'll just go and check it. Yep, it's correct. Okay, so with this one, we're not going to add any extra hard drives because these Hyper-V machines are going to use the iSCSI disk provided by the domain controller. But we do need lots of network cards. So the first network card is going to be bridged out to the internet. Second card's going to go to our host only. Then our third card will go storage, and our fourth card will go heartbeat. Okay, so network adapter. Let's change this to bridged. And we're going to add another network card. And the second network card is going to be a host only card. And then we're going to add a third network card. And this one's going to be plugged into the storage switch. So we're going to go to the LAN segment and we're going to pick up storage. And then we're going to add another card, number 4. And it's going to be a LAN segment, but this is going to be the heartbeat network. Okay. So you can see here I've got bridged, 2's host only, 3 is a LAN segment which we can see is storage, and 4 is also a LAN segment which is heartbeat. Okay, so just checking to make sure everything's fine. Options is fine. Yep, all good. Okay. Later on, for these Hyper-V servers, we might get them to have shared storage. So here in the options, you can see the shared folders is disabled. But what we can do is enable it and share a particular folder that's on the host machine to it. And this will allow us to do things like provide access to ISO images so that we could install a guest virtual machine on the Hyper-V virtual machine. Okay, so I'm going to actually enable that, and I'm going to add a shared folder wizard. So go next. I'm going to browse to, in my case, I'm going to browse to the ISO images or NVMe machines that are in the OneDrive. So I'm going to go to the VM resources folder. So I'm just going to do this one here. Go next. Okay, and I'm going to call it VM resources and go next. Enable this share. So it's going to be read only. Yeah, enable the share and read only. Okay. So now we've got this one folder shared from the host machine where I've got my resources located to this Hyper-V virtual machine. Okay, so that's in the options. Hardware, let's just go and check on our processors. We've got the things ticked. Yep, memory's all okay. Okay, so let's go okay on that machine. And let's now do HV2. So it's now starting to get fairly familiar. We're going to go player, file, open, our 2019 server, and we're going to import this thing as HV2. We're going to browse and change the path and we're going to go down to our drive C and down to my virtual machine folder. I'm going to create a new folder and call it HV2. Now the reason I put this in a separate place other than their default place is because then when I want to back everything up, it's all in one spot, nice and easy to get to. So that's just me. Okay, so now it's into HV2 in that same folder structure. So I'm going to hit the import. And again, what we'll do is we'll just pause until this thing comes back in, and then we'll continue on doing the configuration for this virtual machine. Okay, so HV2's now just come in, and we're going to edit the virtual machine settings. And very similarly to the previous ones, in the memory I'm going to bump it back down to 1536. I'm going to change the number of processors to 4 and tick the box to make sure the virtualization's turned on. In the options I'm going to make sure that this is a Microsoft Windows and that it's Server 2019. And on the shared folders, I'm going to give it access to the same shared folder where I've got all my resources. I'm going to run the wizard. It's interesting that it runs the wizard as though it's Workstation Player 12, even though this is version 16. Host path. We're going to go down to that drive and to here and to here. That's the resources. Next, we're going to read only, enable this share. Okay, so now we've got okay. Hit back and hit back. It should show that it's enabled. Yep, it's all there. Back to hardware. Okay. Okay, so we've got the right things on the processor. We've got the right amount of memory. We've got the right operating system on the general. We've got our shared resources. The other thing we need to do is the network cards. So on the network adapter, first of all, we need to make sure that the first one is bridged. And then we need to add in another network card. So network card 2 is going to be host only. So let's click on host only. And then go add another network card. And this one's going to use the custom LAN segment storage. And then we're going to add in the fourth card. And this card is going to be using the heartbeat LAN segment, which will make it good when we're doing clustering between those two servers. Okay, so now we've got the 4 cards. We need to, I think if I go like that, I can actually see the LAN segments come up. Yep, heartbeat, storage, yep, host only and bridged. Yep, okay, so that all looks good. Okay. So we've got our primary domain controller, Hyper-V1, Hyper-V2 servers. So I'm going to power the first one up. Now I can't start all 3 of them inside this one instance of VM Player. So I'm going to have to start multiple instances of VM Player in order to get all 3 machines running at once. So one workstation player can run one virtual machine at a time. That's it. Okay, whereas something like VirtualBox or VM Workstation, not the player version, the workstation, can run lots and lots of virtual machines per instance of this operating system, of this application running, sorry. Okay, so let's run the PDC. Now this virtual machine, because it's been sys-prepped, will do a mini setup. It's not too bad for this. Windows 10's much worse. But anyway, so we'll just let it work through this. Yep. You'll find that a VM Workstation player is actually quite fast at running virtual machines. It helps that I've got some of my storage set up as NVMe. You might have noticed that the types of hard drives that it can have, NVMe, SCSI, SATA, all that sort of stuff, it's all the latest types of hardware, and so it actually runs them quite well indeed. Something like Hyper-V itself, when we get into that, you'll see that it's only got one type of hard drive and it's an IDE. That's it, and which is really old. Okay, so this is running, so let's just go English, US, okay, next. Okay, so I had to click in there, accept it, administrator, type in a password. Finish. Okay. Now, in order to insert a Control-Alt-Delete, you can hit this. Actually, can you get your mouse out? No, you can't. The way to get your mouse out is to hit the left Control and Alt key together. So I hold the Control key down and then tap the Alt key. That gives me back a mouse. So I can then go out there and hit send a Control-Alt-Delete to the virtual machine. So it shows you the three buttons, Control-Alt-Delete. That's one way. The other way is to actually, when you're actually in here, is to do a Control-Alt. You can't do a Control-Alt-Delete in here. What you do is you can hit a Control-Alt-Insert. The Insert key is generally just above the Delete key or very near it on your keyboard. So Control-Alt and Insert, it's like doing a Control-Alt-Delete, and that is effectively putting a Control-Alt-Delete into the operating system. So that's a little trick that's not sort of mentioned anywhere, but it works. So type in the password again. Okay, we've got some found networks, which is what we expect. Where it mentions here about using the Windows Admin Center to manage the servers, that's exactly what we're going to do. Control-Alt to get out. That our host operating system is going to run that Windows Admin Center via the host-only network card to manage these virtual machines. So we're going to do remote management using that bit of software that's mentioned in here, Windows Admin Center. Okay, so I've actually got that installed already on my host machine, but I'll show you how to do that as well. So I don't want to see that again. Okay, you might need some updates. Okay, so later on we're going to install. What we can do is just install all the updates and let it be fully patched. So we really need all three operating systems in this to be patched to the same level, whatever the level is, the same level. So let's head down to our local machine. We've got this awkward name because it's just got it. We've got our firewalls on. We've got all these Ethernet 012, IP6 enabled, all the rest of it. We've got remote management, remote desktop is disabled. I actually want that enabled so that when we use our Windows Admin Center from the host, it'll actually be able to allow remote connections to this computer. Yep. Remote desktop with network level authentication recommended. Well, I don't really care about the network level authentication. Let's just have anybody can get to it at the moment, which is, you wouldn't do that, obviously. The enhanced security configuration rubbish I turn off because when I'm testing later on with our browser out to the internet, that's just annoying. Hit the refresh button, that becomes off. Yep, there we go. We do need to change the computer name at some point. Let's go and have a look at all of our network cards. So it seems to me like I can only see 3 of the network cards. We only got 3 network cards now, haven't we? So the first card, Ether 0. Okay, Ether 0, 1 and 2. So Ether 0. Properties. It should have an IP address given to it via the external network. What I am going to do is I'm going to turn off the packet scheduler, quality of service. I want full bandwidth on this network card. So that's the first thing I do. The other thing I want to do is I want to have a look at the status and find out what its IP address is. So you can see here it's a 1.63, which is an external IP address. So we've got that. So number 2 should be bridged, which means bridged to the host only card, which means it gets an IP address in the 192.168.64 subnet. So let's have a check of that. Status. So you can see I've got a 192.168.64.130. Now that 130 will be important when we're using our Windows Admin Center to manage this machine. This will be 130. I'm imagining that Hyper-V, HV1 will be 131 and HV2 will be 132. That's what I'm assuming. If not, then we'll statically set the IP address to that. That's not a problem. We can do that. Okay, that's fine. That's okay. And so this card here is going to be our storage driver. And looking at our network over here, our storage network is 10.10.10/24. This is going to be a .1. So let's put the IP address in here. If I look at the status, it won't have an IP address. It's got a 169.254, which is a bullshit address. DHCP is enabled. We need that to be static. So let's just go properties, turn off quality assurance, IP version 4, use a static IP address. This is going to be 190, sorry, it's going to be 10. 10.10.10.1. Subnet mask is the 255.255.255.0. It doesn't have a default gateway. It is the gateway, so all the other ones are going to refer to this, so I'm just going to leave it like that. The default gateways on this machine is actually given out by the outside. This thing gets out to the internet, so we only need one card to have a gateway. There's only one gateway per machine, so okay. Okay, so now we've got all 3 network cards have, if I type in CMD, I did type in CMD, didn't I? Maybe the search engine on this is, oh no, it's there. Right mouse click and pin it to the taskbar. So I'm going to do an IP config/all. And we can see our 3 network cards here. So we've got our awkward name, which we're going to change. Domain, so this is Ethernet 1. Here's Ethernet 0, which is the 1.64, so that's the bridged out. Ethernet 1 is the 64.130, which is the host only card. And then Ethernet 2 is the storage network card, 10.10.10.1. Okay, so that all looks okay. So now we just need to change the awkward name. So do a right mouse click on, oh no, I think I just left mouse click on that. And hit the change button. I'm going to change this name to PDC. Okay. And it's going to want to restart the machine, which is quite fine. Restart your computer, close, close, restart now. Okay, so once this is started, what we need to do is promote this thing to being a domain controller. So it's an Active Directory domain controller. Our Hyper-V, HV1 and HV2 need to join the domain. So we'll set those two machines up and get them to join the domain as well. Okay, so you notice that was actually reasonably fast. Click in here and Control-Alt-Insert and our password. It's actually pretty faster to power up, which is one of the things I like about VMware products. They're pretty fast. Okay, so it's still got 6 services that it needs to start. We'll go to the local server. You can see it's now called PDC, but it's still in a work group. So what we want to do is, on the dashboard, we want to add roles and features. I normally skip that page by default. Next. Next. It's this server. And I want to put in Active Directory domain services and add all the features that's required and go next, 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 and install. So this installs all the prerequisites required to becoming a domain controller, all the features and everything like that. And then we'll actually run the wizard to promote this thing to being a domain controller. Okay, so it's started. We're just got to wait for the caterpillar to get across to the end. Doesn't matter how fast computers are, we're always faster. We're always waiting for them. Would have been interesting if I'd made the SATA drive on this machine when it was imported into an NVMe as well. That would have made it a lot faster as well. Anyway, que sera. That said, while this is installing, we could actually set up the hard drives that we've got that we put in. Although this is finished now, so we'll go close, succeeded. If we look at the notifications, you'll see that it's now got promote this thing to being this server to being a domain controller. So we'll click on that to run that wizard. Now we're not adding this domain controller to an existing domain. This is a brand new domain. So it's it's not a new domain in an existing forest. There's nothing pre-existing, so it's a new forest. So I'm just going to give this my initials or demo or whatever you want to call it. It's actually GWMP, isn't it? No, it's ROI. ROI needs to have a virtual data center. Anyway, it doesn't really matter what the domain name is. Probably making it your own initials is the best thing. So bmw.local, that'll do. Now, uppercase, lowercase makes no difference really. Just enjoying a slightly cold cup of coffee. Okay. Okay, the mouse, the caterpillar is still crawling at the moment. It's funny, I got 2 pointers. Control Alt, click back in there. Now I've only got 1. Okay, so in this one, you can see here it's going to turn it into a DNS server. Normally, it's always a global catalog anyway, because it's the first domain controller. Our forest functional level is normally set 1 generation back, so we're 2019 server, so it can go back to server 2016. It doesn't really matter. You can change the functional level all the way back to server 2008 if you want to. We'll just leave it at the default, that's quite fine. Put in the password, our regular password, and hit next. Next, it gives us a warning because it doesn't have an authoritative parent zone, but we don't really care at the moment. The net BIOS name will just be the short version of our domain name. In this case, it'll just be BMW. The net BIOS name is only available within that subnet. So if you're joining the domain and you're in the same subnet, you can just type in BMW when you want to join the domain, and NetBIOS will find that machine. If I'm in a different subnet to the domain I want to join, then I have to put in the fully qualified domain name, so bmw.local. Okay, so just go next. So NetBIOS is just really a hangover from when we only had LANs. We didn't actually have routers in between and all that sort of stuff. So it was meant for small networks. Okay, they're the standard folders. I don't want to change those. Where it puts all of the Active Directory stuff. So this is just a summary. We'll go next. It does verifies all the prerequisites. It'll come up with a couple of warnings, but in the long run it gives us a green tick that says it's all okay, so we can go ahead and do the install. It's working its way down this list here, obviously. The reason why my computer is rather slow is the speed of the processor is only 2.1 gigahertz, so it's a slow processor. It's got lots of cores, it's got lots of RAM, so it's got lots of that sort of stuff, but it's actually slow. You can see here we've got the green tick, prerequisites all passed. You can see we've got a couple of warnings, but if you scroll down you can see that in the long run all the prerequisites checks completed and it's passed successfully. We can install. If you want to read the warnings, there's nothing really major. Delegation to the DNS couldn't be found, which we already knew. It's assigned to at least one physical network card that doesn't have a static IP address. Que sera. We've got 2 of those actually. And it gives us a warning about cryptography algorithms compatible with NT4, which is a really old version of of Windows, which is a bit of a problem. But anyway, so we'll just go install. So this will continue the install and do a reboot. So what we might do is pause this until that happens. Okay, so you can see it's going to restart. So normally when it's a server and it restarts after becoming a domain controller, it asks you to put in the domain administrator's password and log into the domain. Whereas if you did that with Windows 10, it doesn't. It just assumes you're still going to log into the local machine rather than logging into a domain. The first reboot, like after you've turned it into a domain controller, always takes a little bit longer. It's just shaking everything down and making sure that as it starts up, everything's installed properly in the right places. Okay, so after a reboot, Control-Alt-Insert, Control-Alt-Insert, nope, doesn't want to do that. Let's hit the 3 buttons. Okay, so it's logging into the domain, which is what we expected. Okay. So we can see that we're called PDC, we're in the bmw.local. I was actually thinking about this server having a complaint about the DHCP addresses that it's getting from both the host only and via the bridged cards. The other cards are all fine because they're all going to be static anyway. We could, in actual fact, static these things by just picking some IP addresses well out of the range of where the DHCP is going to give out IP addresses. And the same here as well. And we could put some consistency between the IP addresses on these two. So if we added, like, say, 100 to these, so instead of these being like 64.130, we could make them static and put them as 230, for example, and that would give plenty of space away from the DHCP server where we could static it. Or we could just go, obviously the range here in the host only is from 130 onwards. We could actually static these things and put them lower down in the IP range for that subnet. And on here, this has got an IP address of 62, I think. And so we could, like, make it 230, 230, 230, do the same. At the moment, I'm just going to continue, but I'm just thinking about that for the future. We could actually static all of these things so that that everything's a little bit more consistent and easy to troubleshoot later on. The problem is that my subnet out here is probably different to the subnets that you guys have got. This subnet here probably be okay. The other subnets that we've got in place, they're fine as well. So anyway, it's just the external subnet that could be an issue. Okay, so we'll just leave it for the moment. We've got everything in place. We've turned this thing into a domain controller. We were going to have a look at the 2 hard drives that we put in here, the default hard drives. So if we just do a right mouse click down on the windows down here and look at the disk management, what we're going to see is that it recognizes the 2 60 gigabyte drives that we attached to this right at the very start. So it doesn't matter whether you use MBR or GPT, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use MBR. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's just move this up a little bit so we can see the 2 drives. What we're going to do is right mouse click, and we're going to create a new mirrored volume. So what we're doing is going to mirror these 2 drives together. We're going to add that second drive in. So we get the 2 drives, go next. And I'm going to put this as M for mirror. Well, you could put it for D for data or whatever you feel like, it doesn't really matter. I've got M for mirror will do. Next. And I'm just going to leave the default unit size. I'm going to call this mirrored. And perform a quick format. So that's the summary. Finish. So it'll convert these to dynamic disks, which is fine. Okay, so we've got 2 mirrored drives. They're now drive M, so it comes up as 1 drive. And later on what we're going to do is we're going to create some virtual hard disks on this that's going to be used by iSCSI to give out to hypervisor 1, hypervisor 2, HV1, HV2. Anyway, so we've done what we want to do with this machine for the moment. Now it's time to start up the other machines. So Control Alt to give me the mouse back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start another instance of this up, VMware Player 16. So here's a second version. Whoops, where did it go to? Here it is. Let's move it over out of the road. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up HV1 on this. And while I'm doing that, I'll just minimize our other one out of the road. And I'll move this over so we can, I'll leave it where it was. Go back to here. And I want to move this thing out of the road. There we go, that way we can still see our diagram. So this machine, we need it to join the domain, give it a name of HV1, put all the IP addresses in place and get it to join the domain, and that's all we need to do with that one. And then we'll do the same thing with HV2. So this should be a little bit fast because we're not actually turning it into a domain controller or anything like that. What we could do is put the hypervisor role on it. Okay, that's not a bad thing to do. Okay, so yeah, we're just going to run through the wizard. We accept it. Put our usual passwords in. Whoops, that didn't match. I probably can't type because I'm a little bit dyslexic. Control Alt Insert. So again, the fun part of this is going to be putting all of the IP addresses in. It's finding a few networks. The comments before of setting everything to static, we'll consider that later on if we think that might be necessary. At the moment, we just need it be configured and running. That's the main thing. Again, we could administer this with Windows Admin Center, which we will do later on. Okay, so we're going to go to the local server. Okay, so we're going to turn the enhanced security configuration off. So when we do web browsing later on, you can see all of our network cards. We've got all 4 here now. First network card is the bridged, second one is the host only, third is the storage, and fourth is the heartbeat. So we're going to just do a right mouse click on here, go to properties, Ethernet. Okay, change adapter options. Ethernet 0. Okay, so this thing is going to, if we have a look at the status of this, you'll see it's got the external IP address, so that's fine. It needs some messages, it needs some updates. Don't have a choice, do I? Okay, so we're going to do some of those later on. Okay, so Ethernet 1, which is our second network card, if we look at the properties of that. Actually, we probably should have looked at the status first, because it's got a 64, 131. The other one was 130, this is 131. So obviously the DHCP is just giving it the next sequential address. Okay, so that's the host only, sorry, bridged out to the internet. Host only. Number 2 is going to be our storage. So this is the third card. So we're going to go properties, turn off quality of service, look at our IP version 4, give it an IP address. So this is the storage one, which is the 10.10.10. And this one is HV1, so it's 10. And the subnet mask is .255.255. We don't have a default gateway or DNS server. So that's the IP address for that one. Okay. And then number 3 is going to be the heartbeat, and it's going to have an IP address of 172.1.10. Okay, so right mouse click properties, turn off the quality of service. We want all of the bandwidth. IP version 4 properties, user static. So this is a 172.25.1.10. And it's a /24 network, so that's good. Doesn't have a default gateway there. All good. Okay. So what we're going to do is change the name of the machine here. I'm going to do a CMD. I found this thing's rather slow at coming up with the CMD file, but anyway, it gets there in the long run. Right mouse click and pin it to the taskbar. That way we've always got it. Just one click away. ipconfig/all. And so we'll see our, here's Ethernet 3, which is the last card. So it's the 172.25.1.10. This is Ethernet 1, which is the second card. So it's got the 64, 192.168, which is the host only card. This is Ethernet 0, which is the first card. So it gets 192.168.1. So that's out to the, that's bridged to the host. And then Ethernet 2 is the 10.10.10.10, which is the storage network. You'll notice that these things, you know, these are sort of supplied sort of in the order that they respond, I suppose, is the way to think of it. So they're not always listed in order. You can probably change it so that they do always come in order. But I found that they just come up in a random order. Okay, so what we need to do is change the name of this machine and get it to join into this machine's network here. Okay, so this is where the idea of perhaps having a static IP address would be better, because I need to have HV1 and HV2 to have as their primary DNS server to be pointed to their Active Directory server, the PDC, this thing machine here. And at the moment, I need to have a look at this. And if you have a look at, if you go back to the ipconfig/all, and we have a look at the 0 card, which is this one here, you can see that the DNS settings are set to 1.254. Okay, so here's the DNS 1.254. Okay, what we really need, this machine is not to 1.254, but to the IP address of our DNS server, which is this thing here, because it's now a DNS server. Okay, so I could static it and force it, or what I could do is I could just put a DNS setting into this, even though it's got it via a DHCP, or I could change the actual DHCP server to put it in. Honestly, it's probably easier to have it static in the long run, but I haven't done it for anything else yet, so we'll change that later on. Okay, so let's just go, picks up that, let's go to properties, IP version 4, let's turn off quality of service, IP version 4, properties, I'm going to give it a DNS. So instead of attaining an IP address automatically, we're going to give it a DNS. So I'm going to give it 192.168.1.62. 62 was the IP address of the other machine. And the alternate server will be, actually I'm just going to leave it as that, because we'll put a forwarder from 1.62 out to the 1.254. Okay. So now, because HV1's got the primary domain controller as its DNS server, it can actually join its domain, and that's what we're after. Okay, so let's now go and change this. I'm going to change it. I'm going to call this HV1, and I'm going to put its domain to being BMW. I don't have to put the bmw.local because I'm in the same subnet as HV1 and the DNS is as the PDC, and the DNS points to it as well, so it should find it. Is it going to make a liar of me? No, it found it. Okay. So administrator and our usual password. And that should allow this machine to join into that domain. And now, see the problem with our Active Directory server, it's currently got an IP address of 192.168.1.62, but that's a DHCP address, so it could change. If that happens, then the static address I've got for the DNS then won't find it. So that's a slight problem potentially, in that the IP address could change. So that's another argument for actually staticking all the IP addresses. This thing hasn't finished joining the domain yet. So let's go back to our other. Here's our domain controller. So let's just, can I go Control-Alt-Insert on that? Yes, I can. And I've done the disk management. I just want to go to the tools and to the users and computers and expand out the bmw.local and look at the computers. So it hasn't come in yet. The domain controller is there, it's PDC, but the computer's not there yet. It hasn't actually joined yet. And I'm wondering whether that's a DNS problem, although it did find it. Okay, let's look at our DNS servers at the same time. So let's open up DNS and look up our forward lookup zone, and here's our domain. And you can see the PDC's in there. It's interesting, it's coming up as 64.130, which is also a dynamic IP address as well. Okay, so here's a classic example of where we perhaps should have staticked absolutely everything. Okay, I can see why this thing might end up having a problem actually joining the domain. See, it's come up with an error. Yep. Okay. So it did actually get there at one stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the name of this thing anyway and not worry about the domain to start with. So let's change this to HV1. That'll change the name, and then we'll do a reboot on this machine. What I'm going to go and do is I'm going to go and static everything. I think that's the best way. Yeah, it must restart the computer, that's fine. Restart now. Okay, let's minimize this thing out of the road. Okay, because it's brought up everything as in the 64 subnet, which is interesting because that's also a dynamic IP address. But it's also brought up 1.63. Did I say 1.62 before I did, didn't I? Maybe that's why I didn't find it. Yeah, it's got 1.63. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make everything 230 on this machine. It's going to be, everything's going to be 230. Let's make everything static. Okay, so this one's assigned. Let's go ether00 is the external subnet. Okay, so right mouse click, let's go properties. Quality of service, IP version 4, properties, give it a static IP address of 192.168.1.230. And the preferred DNS server is going to be, well, that's actually looking back at itself, isn't it? So 192.168.1.230. 127.0.0.1's a loopback address. It looks at itself. Okay, so Ethernet 1 is the host only. What I'm going to do is I'm going to static that as well. Quality of service, turn that off. IP version 4. Give it a static IP address. So this is 192.168.64. It's using the 64 subnet. And I'm going to make this 230 as well. Yep. And preferred DNS server, it's looking back at itself. Okay, so what we've done is I've just staticked all of the IP addresses there, because remember this is 10.10.10.1. Okay, so DNS is going to be interesting now. What I might do is, yeah, see I've got those addresses in there now, because it's changed the IP addresses and everything like that. So those statics, that's okay. Do we need to do a reboot? We probably don't. Everything's static. It knows about the static addresses in DNS, so it should be okay. So I'm just going to look at the, well, I'm going to have another quick look at DNS, because what I want to do is make sure that on the PDC, on the properties, we need the forwarder. Look at all the, wow, interesting. The forwarder, we don't want that one. See, it's finding the way out of my system using that. Let's go edit. I don't actually want that one, so I'm going to delete it. And I don't actually want any of these things either. I just want to leave that's the forwarder, that's the way out to the internet. That'll do. Okay. So now I've got the forwarder in the DNS set right, because that goes to my gateway in my home network, which forwards onto the internet service provider, which forwards out to the internet, all that sort of thing. Okay, so my PDC is all staticked. Let's go back to our HV1. Control-Alt-Insert. Okay, and our password in. Remember, I've just changed the name of this machine. So we're going to static the addresses and then join it to the domain. Okay, so we've got 2 of them right, but the other 2 we need to change. So ether00 is going to be staticked outwards. So 230 was my domain controller. This is going to be 231, 232, and this is in the 1 subnet, my bridged, and in the 64 subnet for the host. Okay, so in here, I'm going to look at the properties, IP version 4, give it a and so this needs to be 230, because that's now the IP address. So this is going to be 192.168.1.231. And the default gateway, or the way out of this network, is still the 1.254, so 192.168.1.254. Okay, that has to be on this card. Okay, 230 is the DNS server, which is this thing here. So 1.254 is the gateway out to the internet in my network. In your network, it's going to be whatever your NBN router is at your place. Okay, so here is that one. And the second network card, which is the host only card, let's look at the properties on that. Turn off the quality of service, look at the IP version 4 properties, give it a 192.168.64.231 with a /24 subnet, and leave it as that. Okay, so that's got a static IP address at 64.231 and a bridged network of 1.231. Okay, so I'm still using the 231 addresses on that. Okay, so now I should be able to change the work group and join the domain. So let's join the domain. Let's make BMW. Administrator and the password. So this should be a lot faster because we've taken out a lot of the hunting around that it was doing in between all the networks. Although it's still got some IP version 6s enabled, so it's probably trying to do things with that as well. I suppose we could have turned all those off. Doesn't matter. So welcome to the new domain. It'll do a reboot once we exit. And when we go back to looking at our machine in here and looking at our refresh on the computers here, you'll see that HV1's now in there. So that's what we really wanted. Okay, so the strategy is static everything. Okay. That's the server manager. Okay, so we're going to have, I'll put that up again because we'll use that on the next machine. Okay, so that one's up now. And while that's also up, what I want to do is turn on the hypervisor, Hyper-V. Okay, so what I want to do is I don't want to log into the local administrator. I want to log into the domain. I want to sign into BMW. So I'm going to go BMW/administrator. Use the password. So now it's logging into the domain as a domain administrator. And on our server here, what we want to do is, actually we do want we can see it's in the local. Everything else is all okay. We've got static IP addresses, 64 231s, 10 and 10. Yep, that's good. We should have made these 231. Should have made them all 231s. Doesn't matter. That way that would have been really easy. Back to the dashboard. You want to add a role and a feature, and normally skip this page by default. Next, next, next. So here what we want to do is tick the box for Hyper-V. We want to add any features. You can see it's doing some checking. Comes up all okay, and we'll go next, next, next. Okay, so the virtual machines require virtual switches to communicate with other computers. After you install this role, you can create virtual machines and then attach them to a virtual switch. Only one switch will be created for each network adapter you select. We recommend that you create at least one virtual switch now to provide the virtual machines with connectivity to a physical network. You can add, remove and modify your virtual switches later using the virtual switch manager. Yes, we can. So we've got 4 network cards. Okay. So I think what we'll do is we've got 4 network cards on this machine. So what we'll do is we'll create a virtual switch on all of them. Okay. We recommend that you reserve one network adapter for remote access. To reserve a network, do not select it for use with a virtual switch. Okay. So in that case, that's that one. So they're saying don't select things. Okay, interesting. Because that's the one that's the host only card. So Ether 1 is the host only card. Ether 3 is that's the heartbeat. Ether 0 is bridged out to the internet, and Ether 2 is our storage switch. So we want our virtual machines to be able to connect to all 3 of those: the heartbeat, the storage, and out. The management won't have one, we'll just get directly to it. Okay. We can always delete and add these things later on anyway. It's not a real problem. Allow this server to send and receive live migrations of virtual machines. Send and receive live migration of virtual machines on this server. Configuring Hyper-V now enables any available networks on this to be used for live migrations. If you want to dedicate a specific network for live migration, use the Hyper-V settings after you install the role. That's what we're going to do. We'll do it after we've installed the role. Okay, next, and then install. Okay, so it's just a matter of waiting for this to finish the Hyper-V installation, and then we'll move on to HV2 server. Okay, so we can see now that there are restarts pending on this, so we'll hit close and kill that, and we'll do a restart on it. It's a planned restart. Continue. Okay. So in the configuration of HV1, we've discovered, that we really should be staticking all of the IP addresses and making them consistent. And even now we haven't really got it consistent, because what we've got is we've got a .10 address for the 2 internal networks, and we've got a .231 address for the 2 bridged networks. The host only and the bridged. So normally what I would do is I would make every IP address on this network a .230. So to be 64.230. This one here would be 10.10.10.230. The bridged would be a 230. So everything on that one would be 230, everything on this one would be 231, and everything on that one would be 232. And that would be a lot more consistent. And so, when you're new, when you're talking for any particular network, you'd know that you're always looking, if you're looking for HV1, you're always looking for 231. HV2, you're always looking for 232. So if I was going to build this again, I would static everything, and I'd make sure that all of the IP addresses on this one ended in a .230, everything on this one ended in a .231, and everything on this one ended in a .232. That's the way I would do it now. Okay, so looking at that, this computer's doing a restart. I suspect that these things were actually doing updates as well in the background. Anyway, so let's start up and do, we've got PDC, we've got HV1, let's do HV2 as well. Let's start a new workstation player up. And let's make this one HV2. And let's play that virtual machine. Now remember, each of these virtual machines is only 1.5 gigabytes, so that's another reason why these things are a little bit slow. But that's to make sure that these three machines fit within an 8 gigabyte machine, which they will do, because the three servers only take up 4.5 gigabytes, and the rest can be used for the host operating system. And it should all fit. So the key to this is to make sure that we static all the IP addresses. So we've got this one, and I've got the server, that's the PDC. Stick in one out of the road there. Actually, what I should do is stagger them so you can access them like that. That's the better way to do it. So this one's starting up. Let's give me a mouse. Let's go next. Accept. Usual password. Control Alt Insert, and then type the password. It's found a network card. Okay, let's see if we can do this one pretty straightforward. That way it gives you an idea of how we should have done the first one. Well, let's kill that. Okay, we'll go to our local server. It's got the awkward name and all the rest of it. I turn off the enhanced security configuration rubbish so it doesn't have problems when we go out to the internet. I probably should have turned on remote desktop on the other one. Allow, and untick that. Let's get an IP address. So this is properties. Turn off the quality of service, IP version 4 properties, give it a static IP address. So this is our bridge network, so it's 192.168.1.232. Subnet mask is that. Default gateway is 192.168.1.254 in my case. Yours might be 1.1 or something like that. Preferred DNS server is going to be 192.168.1.230. 230 being our PDC. That's all okay. Our second card is our host-only card. Properties. Turn off quality of service, give an IP address to IP version 4. Static. Let's make it 192.168.64.232 with the correct subnet mask, and that's all we need to do for the host-only card. For our Ethernet card 2, which is our storage card, properties, turn off quality of service, give an IP version 4 address, properties, static, this is going to be 10.10.10.20 for the storage. The subnet mask needs to be 255, whoops, that's not right, 255.255.0, that's correct. So let's just check that just to make sure. Yep, that's all okay. Close that, and then on the last card, it's actually the fourth card, Ethernet 3, turn off quality of service, IP version 4 properties, and this is going to be the heartbeat network. So this is going to be the 172.25.1.20 subnet. 20 IP address, and the subnet needs to be at 255 there. Okay. So we've got static IP addresses on everything. Well, let's go and check that. If I look at CMD, do a right mouse click and pin it to the taskbar. And there it is. And I'll do an IP config/all. So what we've got is not DHCP enabled. So this is the Ethernet 1, which is the bridged host-only card. So it's got the 64 IP address. Ethernet 3, which is the last card, that's the heartbeat. So that's got the 172.25.104.20. It's not DHCP, so it's static. Ethernet 0, which is our main card to get out to the internet. It's not DHCP enabled, it's 1.232. Default gateway of 1.254, and the DNS server is 1.230, which is our PDC. And our other card, number 2, which is our storage, it's a third card, so it's 10.10.10.20, and it's not DHCP enabled, so that's good. So we've got all the right IP addresses in place, so we should be right. Okay, and we've got the right DNS in as well. That was on, so it's pointing to our Active Directory, our PDC machine, 230. So we need to change the name of the machine, the awkward name. Let's change that to HV2. Now normally you can do both of these at the same time, so let's just see if it works. So administrator, our regular password. So it should give us a welcome to the domain. There it is. Go OK. So it's going to require a restart. Okay, so HV1's done a restart. No, it's getting ready to. Don't turn off. It's doing updates, is what it's doing. Okay, so Control Alt Insert. Password 9. Okay, if I do a refresh on this, HV2 should be in there as well. There's HV2. So we've got both servers now as member computers in the domain. So the role for this is done for the moment until we get to the point in the second video of this where we want to install the iSCSI stuff and share stuff out to the other two machines. So that's pretty right for the moment. Okay. Do we have updates and stuff to do on here? Good question. Let's do update. Yes, it's got a whole bunch of updates to do. Okay. I'll do that when we're finish this video. To shut down, I'm going to tell this thing to install all the updates and etc. So this obviously takes a long time because our number 2 is still trying to shut down from before. Our number 3 is now up. So if I go Control Alt Insert, I click in there first. Go Control Alt Insert. Not log into the local administrator, but log into the domain administrator. So let's go BMW /administrator and regular password. Okay, so I've logged into the domain on that. Okay, so if we go to local server, you'll see that I'm in the bmw.local. The thing that I need to do now, you can see I've got static IP addresses on everything here. I've got IP version 6 enabled, but I've got static IP addresses on here, which is what we should have. And check for updates. Okay, so it's check, but we're not going to actually install them as yet. We will install them all. That'll be one of the things that we do to make sure that they're all at the same patch and update sort of level. Okay, what we want to do now is install the Hyper-V role. So we add roles and features. Skip the page by default. It's a role-based. It's this machine. We want to check Hyper-V and add the features. It's going to do a prerequisites check. Yep, next. Next, next. Again, it's saying which network cards do we want to have virtual switches for. And we want to leave, you know what, I'm just going to do the first one in this one, and we can do all the others later if we have to. It's not a problem. Okay, next. 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 And install. This installs the Hyper-V role. I'm going to flick back to our PDC, back to our server, and I'm not going to run all those updates right now. What I want to look at is the DNS. So if I go to DNS, there it is. Expand it out, look at our forward lookup zone, look at our domain, and you can see now that I've got the PDCs in here with the multiple network cards, but we've also got Hyper-V 1 and 2 as 1.231, 1.232, remembering that PDC is 1.230. And that's the name server is the pdc.bmw.local, name server being DNS server. Okay, so we've got all the other things sort of in place. The PDC's got the 3 network cards, so it's got those 3 network cards in there. And we've got the network card that joins the domain from the other 2 machines that have joined the domain as the Hyper-V and Hyper 1 and 2. So that's good. So DNS all looks perfectly fine. And we know that we've got a forwarder on here. Properties, and look at the forwarders. That points out to my NBN router that gets out to the internet. Okay, so this all looks pretty good. My HV1 is still doing updates. So the last thing you want to do is do updates in the middle of all of this, because it's just going to take forever. My recommendation is to get all this stuff set up and then overnight tell it to do updates on all 3 of them. Just get them to do them all in one hit. So at the moment what we've got is we're just about finished for this session. We are finished for this session. What we've got is our PDC, or primary domain controller, promoted to being a domain controller. We've got RAIDed hard drives that we're going to share out via the iSCSI protocol, which we'll look at in the next video, as storage to the 2 Hyper-Vs. The Hyper-V servers we've now got installed with 4 network cards. They've all got static IP addresses. They've both joined the domain, and we've enabled the Hyper-V role. So one thing before we actually go is to have a look at that Hyper-V role, because what we want to do is, with the joint storage that's actually on the PDC, what we want to do is cluster these 2 machines together so they look like 1 computer rather than 2, then create the virtual machine onto the storage, not on local storage, because if this machine fails, then how do we retrieve the virtual machine onto the second one? It's got to be stored out on the storage on the iSCSI target. Yeah, these will be iSCSI initiators, and this will be the iSCSI target. That's where all of the virtual machines will be stored actually on this centralized server. And remember, we've put this on RAIDed hard drives as well. So that means if one of these machines fails, then the other machine can pick it up back, still on the iSCSI server. They've still got access to those virtual machines. So you can flick virtual machines from one server to the other in the cluster. That's the general idea of enterprise level virtualization that's used in data centers. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate. So, the other thing that we wanted to have a quick look at was on that's got Hyper-V installed. Is there anything we need to do there? Add roles and features. We can get rid of those. Get rid of that. Okay, so we're going to go to the tools, and we should be able to see the iSCSI initiator is what we're going to use next time. Where's the Hyper-V manager? Can't see it at the moment. We probably need to do a refresh. And go back and have another look. Okay, so why have we got this thing? Refresh completed with 1 or more warning messages. Task details. Feature restart is pending on HV2. Okay, so we've got to we've got to do the restart before the role, before it's finished. Okay, add the roles and features. So that's what it was trying to tell us, that we needed to do a restart. Okay. So let's do a restart on this one. Is this going to be like Hyper-V? Yeah, look at that, it's doing updates. Okay, so we've got the same thing happening on Hyper-V1, happening on Hyper-V2, so these things are going to be doing updates. But anyway, we've turned on the Hyper-V role. Once this thing does a reboot, this one looks like it's actually flipping through reasonably fast. So what happened to HV1? Okay, this is still just hasn't done the restart yet. Interesting. That was much faster than okay, Control Alt Insert. Our password. Okay, so this one's done updates and it's got the Hyper-V role installed and it's all working. So I don't know what happens to HV1. There's the Hyper-V manager. That's what we wanted to see. So this thing's up and running. Yes, so here's Hyper-V. There's HV2. We could look at our virtual switch manager, and we only put one virtual switch on this. So it was this one, which is bridged to an external network. Okay. And then we've got all the other connections that we could connect it to as well. We've also got internal and private network. Okay, so let's see if we were creating an internal. So this thing's very similar to VirtualBox or anything like that, but there's a button up here for creating a new virtual switch, so we could create new virtual switches in here as well. Okay, just to show you that Hyper-V is actually up and running, we'll worry about that in the next video. So I'm just going to find out what's happened to this machine here. It's just seems to have wet itself. Okay. Can I tell this thing to do a restart the guest? Yeah, let's try that. Yeah, well, we'll just nuke it and redo it. That's okay. Hopefully it wasn't halfway through doing an update. This is a bit similar to what HV2 did. Okay, so it hadn't actually got through the shutdown properly, which it has now. Now it's doing a restart and it's installing all the features, yep. So now it does another restart. It's all to do with the updates. Okay, so let's click in there and go Control Alt Insert. Our regular password. Okay. Yeah, we had a few problems. We shut it down abnormally. Okay, so in the tools here we should see Hyper-V. There it is, Hyper-V Manager. So we have actually, this is HV1, and we've got all, this one had, remember I had 3 virtual switches I put in on this one. So there's the 3 virtual switches. They're all in there. Okay. And if I do a new one, I could go external, internal, or private to create a new virtual switch. This is how you do it here. Okay, so that's the virtual switch manager. So we've now got our PDC, our Hyper-V 1 and our Hyper-V 2 all installed, all configured, basic configuration as in pings, and well, we haven't done any pings, but all the IP addresses are all in place. We've got the HV1 and HV2 have got the hypervisor, the Hyper-V role installed. They're both members of the domain on the PDC, and so this is the basic setup install before we get to looking at clustering and shared storage volumes, and then creating virtual machines and doing things like live migrations and stuff like that. So we're sort of done all the basics, and the next video we'll work on setting up iSCSI storage and things like that. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video.